some of you are probably aware that I did serve in the Israeli army about 10 years ago, and really it helped formulate a lot of my ideas, even though I'm sure a lot of my ideas don't really jibe with the viewpoints of the Israeli military, but it was a very valuable time for me. I've come to appreciate a lot of it in terms of some of the lessons I learned about the way society works, the way government works, and really after leaving the army, which was probably in the 2008, yeah, 2008, beginning of 2008, I left. I did start to discover, thanks to the election that was going on, the philosophies of libertarianism, which I'm not a complete convert. There are certain things I don't agree with libertarianism on, but the ideas that Representative Ron Paul started to, this is his son Rand, but the ideas that he started to promote, non-interventionism, sorry, fiscal restraint, spending cuts, civil liberties, repealing the Patriot Act. Those are ideas that have stuck with me since then. And really, I think that it is thanks to them, the Paul duo, the father and son, Ron Paul and Rand Paul, that I actually have decided not to really become a member of a political party, because I've seen the way they're treated by the members of their political party, the Republicans, and I think it's just a disgrace. And what's happening right now is that he's being smeared basically as a foe of Israel. So I'd like you to hear this video of him during his campaign discussing one of his ideas. And you tell me, does this constitute hostility towards Israel? Whether you're a supporter or not, I'm just asking this question.
I'm proud to support Israel, America's longtime friend and ally in the Middle East. Israel's cafes and buses are bombed, towns are victimized by hundreds of rockets, and its citizens are attacked by Palestinian terrorists. It's time we took a stand for Israel by standing up to the enemies of Israel, the enemies that murder Israeli citizens. That's why I proposed a bill called the Stand with Israel Act to cut off the flow of U.S. taxpayer dollars to the Palestinian Authority. As long as the Palestinian Authority is allied with Hamas, not one more tax dollar should flow to them.
So yeah, I'm not. Look, one of the things that I don't like about American politics is lobbyists. I think AIPAC is a horrible lobbying organization. I think that their main objective is to increase foreign aid to Israel, and I think that it's having a bad effect on the American political discourse, because you should be able to question that expenditure. I think we should all be able to question every expenditure. We should have free debate on it. Israelis should be able to try to explain why they think it's necessary, which I don't think it is. And the opponents of the aid should be able to say, well, we don't believe it's necessary. Yes, can it become hostile? Can there be people who are objecting to the aid because they actually despise Israel? Absolutely. I think that a lot of people who object to foreign aid to Israel specifically do so for that reason. But in the case of Dr. Paul, in the case of people like me, we object to it because we know, and I go through it in this article, which is going to be published tomorrow, hopefully, either on Times of Israel or elsewhere in the blog section. What I try to say is that when you receive something, when you receive all of that money, all of those all those aid packages, you cannot expect that you're not going to be told to give something in return. So when I see these Israel activists objecting to concessions, objecting to these requirements for Israel to free settlements, I say, fine. I mean, if you're against that, if you think that that's a bad idea, then you should not accept foreign aid. You should basically try to say that Israel should be an independent country that would be able to chart its own independent foreign policy. I believe, by the way, I believe in sovereignty of every country that wants to be a free nation among the rest of the nations. I think that that's the most moral argument that you can make. I don't claim that it's going to set up a perfect system that will eliminate all wars, but it'll certainly eliminate a lot of the wars that are going on around the world. I'm not somebody who says that because I criticize China and I think China is having a destructive influence on countries around the world. It does not mean, like Bill Kristol, that I want the United States to invade China. I am trying to address issues that China is causing around the world. The same with regards to countries like Pakistan. And by the way, I'm fine. There's countries that I think have positive effects on the world, like India. I think it's okay to criticize India. It's okay to criticize Israel. It's okay to criticize any country, but we have to recognize that the sovereignty of every country is really what sets it apart. We cannot have these agreements where you're having all of these, basically these aid packages, this quid pro quo relationship that's caused. And I'm not going to read through my entire article. I want you guys to read it. But essentially, the AIPAC and the Christians United for Israel, which Christians United for Israel, I don't really know a lot of people that are affiliated with it, but I know people who are supporters of AIPAC, contribute to it, even members of it. And I've told them flat out that I think it's a bad organization. I've told them that by furthering this aid dependency, by making everything about this relationship contingent on military aid, they're actually limiting the operational freedom of the Israeli army. Now, some of you might be out there saying, well, we don't even want it to be operationally free because we oppose Israel. Okay, that's your problem. I am saying that as long as you have, so these people oppose foreign aid to Israel, but they should know that when I was in the army, the United States would be very involved in brokering ceasefires and basically twisting Israel's arm into a ceasefire, into telling Israel when to freeze settlement activity. Did Israel sometimes object or try to weasel out of it? Yes, they did. But the fact of the matter is that the influence is strong enough to make it such that the U.S. it does have the right to demand things in exchange for that aid. You can't expect something for nothing. So therefore, Israel does have to give something back, and they do give stuff back. And some of those compromises are in terms of actual tangible security needs. So I think it's an unfair relationship for Americans, and it's an unfair relationship for the Israelis. And if you want to go that far, I would say it's unfair for Palestinians and it's unfair for other people. But I think every country should be able to pursue its own interests. I think that the United States and Israel should be able to cooperate on certain things, but pursue their own interests on other things. So I think we should be selling the Israelis weapons, but I don't think we should be giving these aid packages where they end up basically buying those weapons back from our defense contractors. That's the way I think that we need to change the relationship. President Bush, and I go into some detail, not terribly long detail. President Bush put out a roadmap in 2003 for peace and basically was trying to say that the Palestinian Authority must be reformed and that Israel must bring to an end the occupation of the West Bank. And I think that President Bush had good intentions, just like he always had. And like he always did, President Bush completely screwed up everything that he did with respect to that. President Bush began injecting this group of intermediaries into the conflict, into the peace process, really, called the Quartet. The Quartet consisted of 4 entities: the European Union, Russia, the United Nations, and the USA, and they would be the mediators in this conflict. And as we've known since 2003, the way the world's changed, it hasn't worked out that way at all. The European Union and Russia don't get along at all. And the U.S. and Russia also have problems between them. And the United Nations cannot be expected to be an objective mediator in this dispute because the majority of its states don't necessarily like Israel, if I could put it that way. They pass resolutions all the time that condemn Israel. So in reality, President Bush had very good intentions and he was trying to get everybody on board to do this, and he still failed. And he failed for the obvious reason that there are too many people involved, and it's partially as a result of his ridiculous perspective on the world that he thought that the United States could be the policeman and go in and intervene in Iraq and basically fight this worldwide war on terror. And then there was the Patriot Act here in the U.S. It's partially because of that we had all of the turmoil of the following years. And then we ended up having Obama, who basically continued a lot of Bush's policies, but with a much more palatable packaging. That many people don't care that President Obama continued a lot of President Bush's foreign policy, security policy, surveillance policy. They don't care because they love President Obama. President Obama and President Bush did virtually their policies with respect to all of this were virtually the same. In some ways, President Obama was more hostile to Israel than President Bush. But if you look at their policies, the two of them, you can find that there is this inconsistency that is consistent between the two. Whenever there is something that they need to extract from the Israelis, they threaten to decrease foreign aid. Whenever there are certain areas where they want to use the Israelis in order to further their goals, they're willing to do that as well. And then sometimes they're willing to concede things to the Israelis too. So has that brought any progress in the region? Has it brought progress towards peace? Absolutely not. But both President Obama and President Bush publicly stated, and I think in either case you could say that they did want to get to a peace agreement. I don't think that they wanted to continue the war, but it's been a failure. And it's been a failure partially as a result of their ridiculous framework with this quartet, which, by the way, Obama did continue. And partially it is because of this foreign aid. And I frankly believe that if we ended foreign aid, not just in this issue, not just with respect to Israel and with respect to, its military aid, but all over the world, I think that the United States would be able to establish more fruitful and more respectful relationships with all these countries that we're already allies with. I think we could salvage the relationship with Pakistan potentially down the road. I think in the short term, it's not really doing so well. What have we gotten in return for all of this aid that we've given to Saudi Arabia and Turkey? Well, those countries aren't actually sympathetic to us. They're using those military hardwares in order to pursue other proxy conflicts in the region. So even if you believe that the aid to Israel is beneficial, the model of foreign aid being a basis for mutually beneficial relationship on a bilateral basis is not true. If you look at the majority of the cases, in respect to Israel, I'd agree that it's almost the same. There might not be the same degree of hostility between the two countries, Israel and the USA, but there's plenty of problems with the relationship. And those that would like to sweep them under the rug, they're really just living in a Pollyanna world. They don't understand that the world does change and that this can't go on forever. You cannot have American taxpayers footing the bill for this military hardware forever in order to have Israel spend it back with American contractors. I don't understand why people can't at least address the question, if not, at least respect the premise of what I'm talking about. Now, Senator Paul has said repeatedly that he does want to end all foreign aid around the world, and it's one of the reasons that I've supported him, and I did support his dad, even though his dad, I think, is much more of an extremist in regards to isolationism than I am. So you had there's an exchange here in 2011 where he talked to Wolf Blitzer, where he was asked, what about the $2 billion or $3 billion that goes every year to Israel? Do you want to eliminate that as well? So Paul responds, well, I think what you have to do is you have to look. When you send foreign aid, you actually send quite a bit to Israel's enemies. Islamic nations around Israel get quite a bit of foreign aid too. Blitzer says Egypt gets almost the same amount. Paul says almost the same amount. So really you have to ask yourself, are we funding an arms race on both sides? I have a lot of sympathy and respect for Israel as a democratic nation, as a fountain of peace and a fountain of democracy within the Middle East. But at the same time, I don't believe in funding both sides of the arms race, particularly when you have to borrow money from China to send it to someone else. We just can't do it anymore. The debt is all-consuming, and it threatens our well-being as a country. So Blitzer asks, all right, so just to be precise, and all foreign aid, including the foreign aid to Israel as well. Is that right? Paul says yes. In response to those statements, the Washington Post's Jennifer Rubin called Paul a neo-isolationist and called for him to be condemned. So Jennifer Rubin is famous. She's this Washington Post reporter who went from being a complete and total neocon Republican under Obama, who thought Obama was like the worst, into basically the biggest anti-Trumper that you can imagine. And the most famous example was when Donald Trump withdrew from the Paris Climate Accords. Within like a couple weeks, she went from being a staunch opponent of the agreement into being a supporter of it. So you can see these are the type of people that go after Rand Paul because they believe in the military-industrial complex. They don't believe in its role in, if you believe in the military-industrial complex, let's just play devil's advocate for a second. You would probably believe that it serves a role of defending your country or other countries or whatever. People like Jennifer Rubin believe in the military-industrial complex as a goal in and of itself. That's really what they're doing. They are not serving the interests of the public at large. They're serving the interests of these corporations. So I'm not going to stand by them. I don't care if they are publicly pro-America, pro-Israel, or whatever. I will continue to look for the solution that I think is most appropriate. So, let me see here. There is a video, by the way. There is a video of Dr. Paul. Actually, we might as well use this one. So he responds to the Taylor Force Act. So listen to this.
Chairman, for having this committee as hearing on the subject. As you'll recall, in 2014, I brought this subject up in Senate Bill 2265, where I offered a bill that would have cut off aid to the Palestinian Authority unless they were to renounce all ties to terrorism and payments such as these. The chairman blocked me at the time from bringing it forward in the full House or the full Senate, but said it would be a good committee hearing. And so I'm glad we are having a committee hearing on the subject, not my bill, but the subject, and I'm supportive of the subject. I think, though, that I tend to agree with Senator Risch in the sense that, you beat around the edges and say how much we love Palestinian Authority for all these other things we have to have for stability. We're going to cut some a little bit here, maybe. And people are worried, oh, gosh, if we cut any of their money, they'll be mad. People sense weakness and, cut it all. Cut every last penny of it. If you want to restart some of it, restart it when they change their behavior. That would be the strength that actually would show something. But nibbling around the edges, they sense your weakness, and they will continue to do it. They've been doing it forever. But I guess the thing that really galls me is from Ambassador Shapiro's testimony that the Knesset is considering withholding tax revenue commensurate with the prisoners' payments, although it's far from clear that it will reach final passage. If the Knesset can't even withhold the tax money, some amount of money equivalent to what the payments are, my goodness, what kind of message are we sending? So if we've got a message, if the Knesset's listening to us, for goodness sakes, you've got to do at least that first step if you object to people paying the families of people who are killing innocent citizens. So, both sides need to act. We need to do more. And I do all of it. And then I dial some of it back, would be my personal opinion, if you get a change in behavior. But if you nickel and dime it and do a little bit at a time, my prediction is you'll get the same behavior you've gotten for years. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So this is a consistent position. And I don't care if he's sincerely a friend of Israel. I think that his position is just a practical one, which is that we're not going to fund the Palestinian Authority and we're not going to fund this military aid to Israel. We will simply allow them to develop their relationship in as much as they want one. And if not, then we're not going to intervene. There's not going to be this bullshit roadmap for peace that President Bush had. And that's really why I supported this person. And I wish we did have him in a more powerful position than a U.S. senator from Kentucky. I did want him to be the president. The fact of the matter is that we didn't get that chance. He was virtually ignored during the election. He's not the only candidate like that. So I'm sorry, but I'm not going to, because AIPAC, this organization, which is a lobbyist group, just like any other lobbyist group, I am not going to change my opinion because AIPAC suddenly decides that this person who's been consistent over the years has said the same thing over the years because he's sticking to his position. So no, I stand with Rand, and I will continue to support this idea just like I have for the past few years. So that's about it. Please like my videos, share the video, subscribe to my channel. Please read this article when it comes out. I hope to have the URL up tomorrow. And also, please contribute to the Patreon below and comment on this video. And have a happy Friday and TGIF. Enjoy your weekend and go Cowboys.